I'm just very excited to speak to you today, Dr. Jennifer Patrice Sims, and you are an associate professor in sociology at the University of Alabama in Huntsville.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining me today. And I think to get started, I imagine just having an audience of people that are aspiring academics, graduate students, students, of course, and people entering the profession. And so I guess to start there, like how did you come to enter the profession or get on this academic pathway?
Yeah, so I loved sociology. I loved school when I was an undergraduate, so I went on to graduate school. Then after my master's, I was an adjunct professor at two community colleges. And that's hard being an adjunct. You're only paid semester by semester, not a lot of stability. So I went back to graduate school and got my PhD and then graduated and became an adjunct again. So my kind of entry to the profession was adjuncting. And so after 4 years on the job market post PhD, I did land my tenure track job and then I am now tenured. But I really came to the profession through adjuncting, which
Mhm.
means that teaching has always been one of the kind of pillars of my journey through academia. So I always wanted to do research, but just having that adjunct background and often adjuncting was paying the bills along the way. So my journey has really been one of both teaching and research to get here.
That's great that you have that perspective because, of course, adjuncting is the way that the majority of classes in the United States is taught, unfortunately. And so to have that perspective of just the way that academic labor can be exploited, and then also how it can be, appreciated with these full-time tenure track jobs. And so
Mhm.
perhaps you can also speak to just the role of publishing and writing within considering those kinds of challenges that some folks are adjuncting or their graduate students teaching. Like, how do we really fit in this academic writing, like the ideal of like how we're supposed to, but then the reality of like what really happens? And even just it's kind
Yeah.
of disheartening too, because who reads this stuff? It's hard to get published. It's mean. Like
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
lot to endure to continue on with.
No, it really is a lot. And I dedicated my most recent book to adjuncts because
Right.
the foundation for that book, the ideas for that book came about out of my teaching while I was adjunct teaching, while I was teaching as a graduate student. So, kind of
Mhm.
two really precarious teaching positions. And unless I had gotten this job, a tenure track job, I would not have been able to write that book because it does take so much time and effort. And often when we say, oh, we're adjuncting, what we're glossing over is that we have a much higher teaching load than a tenure track or a tenured professor has. And so having that higher teaching load really makes it harder to do the amount of writing that it does take to get not just articles out, but books, which are much, much longer than that.
Yeah. How did you start? What was that first
So
publication?
so my first book, that
Or
was a
even just article, like what was the first thing?
So I'd have to look back at the dates to see which came first, my first article or my first book, but they did both come out in the summer of 2012. So I just don't remember like date wise which
Mm.
came first. But it was really interesting to see the difference in the two processes as I was working on the article and the book simultaneously, such that they came out at the same time. So just kind of seeing the difference in what it's like writing an article and what it's like writing a book. And what I found is that for writing articles, graduate students have so much assistance. So my advisor was right there. There's, information online, how to write articles. If you go to any articles webpage, it's going to say guidance for authors. And it tells you everything you need to know down to we want this citation style. We want this sort of headers. Please use this sort of language. Like article writing, it's not, 100% transparent. Nothing is, but it felt a lot more transparent for a graduate student than my first book. My first book, I felt like I was just kind of going blind. Unlike articles, you can submit a book proposal to multiple presses at the same time. So then I'm trying to figure out how do I write this proposal when it's going to be going to so many different places, and so many different places have all of their different, ways that they want it written. And so with regards to the two of them, I feel like book writing for particular, like if you're a qualitative scholar in particular, I feel like that is going to be a really good route to go because of the really generous word limits. You don't try to clip your interviewee's quotes or not use as in-depth theory as, a 10,000 word article or less would allow you to do. But the process can be even less transparent and more tricky to navigate and with less institutional support. Like I was lucky, my advisor had also written a book before, so he was able to kind of give me some guidance on that. But other folks aren't book people, so then if their mentees or their graduate students want to write books, then maybe hopefully they have a friend they can refer them to. But unlike articles, books aren't something that all academics write, so therefore the information around it can be harder to get.
That's a good point. I guess, yeah, the article is very clear because it has the guidelines, and also, of course, the journal provides many examples. And I guess it's
Yes.
also a challenge just thinking about, I mean, the different disciplines, of course, have different norms. And it seems like the way we're taught to write a dissertation, that's not the way that the book ultimately should be. And so that made me so mad. It's like, well, why teach us to write a different dissertation that's different than the actual book product?
And we see some programs that have moved to a 3 article dissertation kind of model
Mm.
to help make
Oh,
the
that would,
dissertation something
yes.
that will be helpful for the student upon graduation. You have these 3 articles that you have, but that doesn't help people who want to turn their dissertation into a book.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I imagine like because you're also providing this service to folks that are in academia. And so, I mean, are all the folks that you work with sociologists, or no, you have to know a few different kinds of disciplines and the norms there?
Um, no, most people that I've worked with have been sociologists.
Oh,
The
good.
few that have not have been social scientists, so very closely
Mm,
aligned with sociology, so political science or interdisciplinary social science studies. So it's just really close to sociology that I've
okay.
worked with. So the norms are going to be really similar, even though, of course, like the citation styles may be different or enough, a few different norms.
And so what was your journey, your first book then? I didn't realize, yeah, your articles in your book, because usually it's like we have lots of practice with like chapters or articles. So that for you to have a book and articles like come out at the same time, it's like, wow, that's a lot.
So that process was a lot of bumbling through the dark. And it was actually an accident that I did that first book. I was a graduate student. I hadn't even done my dissertation yet.
Hmm.
But I am a huge but critical Harry Potter fan. And I received a present of this book, The Psychology of Harry Potter, for Christmas one year when I was in grad school. And so the person, my sister who gave it to me, had asked me later on, like, oh, how'd you like the book? And I said, it was good, but psychology, they don't pay attention to groups and they don't pay attention to context. And I just feel like someone should write a sociology of Harry Potter. And then my sister, who's an English major, quoted Toni Morrison and said, well, if there's a book you want to read that hasn't been written, you need to be the one to write it. So you should write it. And so I just kind of randomly sent out a call for papers like, hey
Oh.
folks, who wants to write about the sociology of Harry Potter, like hit me up. And honestly, I had 2 dozen people were like, absolutely, I will contribute a chapter to this book. And I just kind of bumbled my way through and would ask my advisor, who had also done an edited volume, for kind of advice along the way. And that's how I learned about book proposals and how they're so different depending on what press you're wanting to kind of aim for. And so I just kind of bumbled my way through the dark, got that book done. Then, because I had learned from the mistakes I made on that one, then my next book, which was my dissertation turned into a book, was a bit more smooth sailing. And then by the time I got to my third and fourth books, I was like, okay, I've got this one down. And so when I landed those contracts, my friends were like, "You're really good at this. You should like help other people." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I guess I can do that. If people would want some help with their book proposals, I'm happy to do that."
Wow, that first project, then I didn't quite realize it's an anthology. And so that means you're dealing with, you said like multiple dozens, like over 15 people
Yes.
submitting, getting their chapters in on time, compiling them, editing them, and
Mhm.
you were able to submit that out and just did it take a few rounds or did you get lucky
So
right away?
I submitted the book proposals as the publisher asked for it on the websites, which is not the full book. And so that's kind of one of the big questions that people I work with on their proposals ask is, do I need the whole book to submit, or do I just need the proposal? And so I'm always a proponent of do the proposal. And then if the editor is interested and wants more, then you can send a sample chapter, or they'll say, send me, the full book. And so once I sent out that call for papers and people sent in, their proposals for chapters, and then I picked the 22 that I thought would make the best, would fit together best in the book. So then when I had those, then I started sending out proposals to editors at different presses saying, this is book idea. We're working on the chapters currently, trying to get a contract. That was hard. That took almost a year. I'm so thankful to my to all of the contributors for hanging in with the first time author, because it did take a year. But I realized at the end of that process that the reason it took so long is that I was sending in proposals cold. The editors had no idea who I was. I just found their name, like, oh, you're the sociology editor at this press. And I sent in the whole proposal. And so for my next books, I sent an email first to the editors and said, hey, I've got this book idea. Here's the stage I'm in. Would you be interested in a proposal? And then some said yes, some said no, but that then saved me kind of that year's worth of writing, waiting, getting, them saying no, and kind of going back and forth in that iterative process. And so, yeah, I learned a lot from that first one. Again, so thankful that all of those writers for those chapters, put their trust in me. I was a grad student. A lot of them were actually professors, tenure track professors, but we got the book done, and we're really proud of it. It was exciting. And like I said, I learned a lot about the proposal process, what to do, what not to do. And so then, later I was like, you know what? Well, if I'm in a position to help others, I'd love to do that.
That's such a different product, like the anthology versus a sole authored book.
Mhm.
When you're talking to clients, then does that cover it? Are they also co-authors writing with multiple people?
Right. No, all of my clients have been sole authors,
Authored.
trying to write their first books, actually.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
what are their kinds of questions? What are you helping them through? Do you do this kind of step-by-step process of the proposal and getting that solid and then figuring out the sample chapters?
Right. So when clients come to me, they generally already have a proposal drafted, and they're just wondering, is this good? Am I on the right track? Am I answering, the questions the way they want them to be answered? And so that's when I go over it with the fine tooth comb, give them written feedback, and then have a Zoom meeting where we talk about the feedback and go over it. And some of the kind of big questions and stumbling blocks are just things that are unique to books that, again, were not taught about in graduate school. So one of the things a press will ask for are shelf neighbors or competing titles. And what that means are other books that are kind of in this particular genre. But folks, one big mistake is people think, oh, well, I need to describe the books that I've cited in my literature, right? Those are the books that are similar to mine. Obviously, I'm drawing on them. But that's not what that's actually asking. What that's actually asking is a marketing question. They're actually trying to figure out what are the competing books out there on this topic that somebody may spend their $25 on versus purchasing your book, for $25. And so what you really want to do is not shy away from putting blockbuster books, right? So if I'm getting ready to write a book on, say, a sociology book on race and work, I want to put down Adia Harvey Wingfield's new book on race and work, on gray areas. I want to put down Jane Jones's new book on racism in the halls of Congress and how, there's employment inequality there. So I want to put down those books to show these are good selling books. These have been getting, attention within the discipline, and show how, okay, and then the publishers can say, okay, that's great. These types of books do actually sell, do actually make an impact. Because what we have to remember is that, unlike academic journal articles, or less, so more so than academic journals that are publishing articles, book publishers are trying to make money. So the proposal is actually a marketing document.
Right.
as much as it is an academic document. By the time you write up a proposal, you've got the research, you've got the data to, to do a book. The editor's going to assume that you're a competent person and can write the book. But what they want to know is, will this book sell? And so your proposal has to be kind of more of a marketing document. So one thing when I get the proposals from clients is we're really kind of working on that kind of framing of just strictly academic writing, which is what we do in journal articles. We're not trying to sell anything in a journal article. We're just reporting on our research. But in a book proposal, you actually are trying to convince the reader, this editor, to take it to the board, take it to those discussions and be like, this is the book we should invest in. This is what we need to put our name on and sell.
That's difficult for academics. We're not great marketers and very shy
Mhm.
and not into bragging or talking it up. But I realize that books of marketing, a product that they're trying to sell. I guess I hadn't ever thought that an academic journal article is definitely not an article that is a product that no one sells because they have this, this industrial hold, the journals just
Mhm.
naturally have this kind of cartel that is sold to these academic libraries who are just forced to take all of the collection. But
Mhm.
yeah, when you're switching then to a book publisher, then you have to kind of talk in these marketing terms. And so I'm
Mhm.
imagining that the people you talk to just have trouble with that kind of language and that kind of shift because it's
Mhm.
not I saw in your materials you said this is not, you don't want that academic tone of like summarizing the book, but it's now kind of
Mhm.
pitching the book. Like how
Right.
is that transition for folks?
Yeah, it's a kind of difference in persuasive writing versus
Right.
informative writing. And it's interesting because the book itself, when you write the manuscript, will be informative writing. But the proposal needs to be a bit more on that persuasive side.
Hmm. And so how do folks like how do you get them to do that?
So I just give them kind of made up examples. This is an example of, like, I'll pop it in the chat when we're having a Zoom. Like, this is an example of summarizing a topic versus
Mm.
this an example of marketing or selling a book on that topic. And then once they see those kind of two, just little small paragraphs popped into the chat, once they see that, then it's like light bulb clicks, like, got it, I got it. And then
Hmm.
they can run with it and do that.
So what do you think we need to know? Like, what are publishers, what do they want that we're not producing? Is it because we send them our old dissertation, like in the whole thing at once or something? Like, what would publishers tell us? Like, here's the mistakes you folks fresh out of grad school make, and this is what you need to really kind of shift your whole way of writing, presenting your materials.
So I'm not a publisher, so I'm not sure what they would say, but I can tell you how I've helped my clients
Hmm.
change their writing and then go on and get contracts with Cambridge University Press, with Polity Press, and with these other presses. And one thing that I do tell them is that in the proposal, that is where you are selling the document. You are not just informing the editor about the book, because the editors are super busy. I do actually know, when I talked to one of my editors, I had followed up like, oh, just following up on this, that, and the other. And he's like, oh, I'm going to read your proposal, today when I'm on the train from X to Y. And I'm like, so this is really when things are getting done. The editors have so many. I mean, some presses, like Oxford University Press, for example, has one editor for all of sociology. Like, that's a
Okay.
lot for one person to be reading. And so they're not sitting down like someone sits down with an academic journal article and they've, got the article. They're like, I'm ready to read this. I'm reading it because I'm interested in the topic, or it might relate to some research I'm doing. These editors are reading so many so fast. It's much more akin to grant reading and grant writing, actually,
Mm.
than article writing for that proposal.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So yeah, so one thing I really do work with the clients on is, let's get it concise. Let's tell the, information right out the door. A lot of us have been taught to like build up her contribution, and like,
Right.
you show the literature and I'm building on it. It's like, that's great for the book, But for the proposal, that editor on the train who's trying to read through like 30 of these does not have time for the buildup. So please tell him on page one, tell her on page one, what is this book going to be about? And then that will kind of really help. And then the other thing, which I learned from my mistakes on my first book, is the editor needs to know who you are before they get your proposal. And I know that's like really hard.
Okay.
Some folks come from programs where their advisor was a big time book writer. And so therefore they're able to take them to conferences and introduce them to their editors and all of that wonderful stuff. Others of us don't have that. Me and my advisor, although he did write books, we're very different topics, very different styles. So it's not like he could just introduce me to his handbook, editor, author, and be like, she wants to write this whole other type of book. So that wasn't going to work. And so what I found after my first book was that emailing editors before I even wrote the proposal and saying, hey, I have this idea for this particular book. Does this fit into your kind of current areas of focus? Would you be interested in receiving a full proposal? And some editors said, no, that's kind of not what we're doing right now. And others were like, yeah, send me the proposal, when you have it. And so doing that first meant that when that editor is tired and on that train on their commute and they're going to look at the proposals, they see my name and go, oh yeah, this is the woman that emailed me. Okay, now they're a bit more interested and may read it a bit more than just the first time. Like I said, it took a year because I was cold to all of those editors. None of them knew who I was before I sent that in.
How important do you think that is? Like now we have to think about the editor on the train. So I'm thinking like maybe you only have a few minutes, to really kind of capture their attention. And then how important is it fitting into their niche or their publishing lineup? Because I know I might submit to a book series. And so I look at a book series, see who that editor is, see what other books they've published. And so I wonder, like, is it completely up to what their needs are for that particular series? How open are they to other kinds of ideas or something?
Right, right. So in my experience, and you have to talk to an editor to see if this
Right,
is code. But one thing I was told when my first book was rejected is that doesn't fit the direction we're going right now.
right.
And I believed that on the surface because, again, that was the sociology of Harry Potter, and I had not seen any sociology of insert pop cultural thing here at that time.
Mm.
Now we've had the sociology of Cardi B be published by, I think it was Rutledge University Press, which actually was one of the ones that declined my book 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And so it does seem like at that time, that's not the sort of thing they were publishing. But now if we look at what Rutledge is publishing, it does seem like they're more on we'll publish more things on sociology and pop culture. And so I don't know if that's a timing thing. The readership market just wasn't interested, 12 years ago, or if maybe the editors changed. I don't know what happened there, but I have seen that change. And then there's other presses that are kind of known for publishing things kind of more close to home. So like University of Chicago Press has published a number of books. There was ethnographies of guess where? Chicago. We know Polity Press publishes things that are more quote unquote forward facing. So books that are academic, but we would like, the authors would like a public audience, general, a non-academic audience to read the books as well. And so when you're looking for a publisher, the kind of key isn't what is their absolute specific kind of niche there, but if you kind of think overall, like, okay, if I was trying to do a book that was an ethnography of someplace in, Florida, would University of Chicago actually be the absolute best? Not that they only publish stuff on Chicago, but maybe I should kind of consider, somewhere else. Some presses are more known for publishing ethnographies than, presses known for publishing more quantitative, work. And so if you just kind of look at the current catalog, kind of back, say, 3-4 years to see kind of, okay, what's being published in this area kind of right now, then that can be helpful. And again, sending that email to the editor to specifically ask, is my topic, my methodology, my idea for the book, my approach, is that something you are interested in right now? Saves you so much time from getting that, this isn't what we were looking for. And then I was thinking to myself, man, I should have asked what you were looking for before I sent you before I spent time writing a 10-page proposal. I could have written, a short email and saved my time, because each proposal does need to be tailored to that particular publisher.
Right. So this initial email is just a very short thing. It's, are you basically interested in this topic?
Yeah, I give my I did a workshop in the spring on just kind of the hidden curriculum of academia, and me and another person who is a series editor were talking about book publishing. And so I kind of popped in the chat a little, I guess, template for like,
Mhm.
dear so and so, I found your email here. I have a book on this topic. It will cover, X, Y, and Z. Would you be interested in a full proposal? Just kind of like a real formulaic little, just quick email to the editor. And like I said, that's great, because then if they tell you no, you're like, saved myself writing 10 pages formulated to them, and this isn't even what they wanted.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I would have not probably done that and would have looked at their template for the book proposal written out that or not gotten around
Mhm.
to it. Then it just gets pushed back in time instead of
Yes.
just getting that yes or no, which could be so helpful to, I guess, first finding a press that is the best fit for your topic.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you're also saying that it's kind of assumed that you can write the book. Like, I think a lot of us might be stuck in really needing to prove that we can write it. Like, here's our resume with other articles and publications, or just being afraid that they're going to say, like, well, you haven't written a book or you haven't published much, so maybe then I shouldn't do it too. Like,
Hmm.
people could be psyched out or not submit because of that. So what about some background in writing? Like how much of that do you have to have?
We'd have to ask an editor, but in my experience, I was a graduate student. I'd finished a
Mhm.
master's, and that was pretty much the only thing I could say that I had written at that point. I'm a Harry Potter fan, and I finished a master's. Like, there's my credentials. With regards to, to others, Pete, you're right. There is this fear. I was working with a client. She's an assistant professor, and the press that she was submitting to had a section in their proposals where they wanted you to say the author's qualifications. And so in this section, she listed, I mean, she's gotten grants, she's gotten awards, like just wonderful, wonderful scholar. And I told her, I said, that's all great, but what they're actually kind of looking for here is, are you the best person to write this book? Do you have the qualifications to write this book? Because, and again, presses differ, but when presses send a manuscript to people to review. So I've reviewed manuscripts for a number of presses. And when you get that, oftentimes there's like a sheet, like, please answer these particular questions about this manuscript, and tell us, like, do you think we should publish it? And one of those questions um, is, is this person qualified to write this book? So not, is this person a fantabulous scholar? Does this person have so many awards? But are they the one to write this particular book? And so I worked with that client to kind of retool, her section, and not so much focus on all of the awards she's gotten, but she'd already written, a number of articles, and some of those articles would be the basis for chapters in her book. And so, we kind of retooled that section to say she would be, she's qualified to write this book. She's already written a number of articles, on that book. She's written some forward facing, say, op-eds, and internet essays on the book. So that can kind of show that she can write both for the public and for academics.
Mhm.
And she, has graduate students that she has mentored and reviewed their work. And so she kind of, then when we focused on some of those things, that shows, yeah, she hasn't written a book before. Every first time author is a first time author, but she's got these other background things that show that, yes, she can do this work.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Just selling yourself also that you're the best
Mm-hmm.
fit for that. So
Which
what
again
are
is so hard for academics. We're not used to writing persuasively. We're used to writing very informatively. We're used to, writing very analytically, but that persuasive marketing piece doesn't is not taught to us and doesn't often come natural.
so what are some other good points that you give your clients or just that you've learned from your own experience? Because I mean, yeah, you have all these, like you have your forthcoming book, correct? And
Yes.
so I'm sure that every single step you learn something new, you learn what not to do. And it's an interesting process because it's not a linear process. You would think, oh, the second book, it's, going in that proper direction. But I've published two books and, I was just disappointed. Like the second book, of course, was only hardcover, and so it's very expensive. And then it just doesn't get out there in the world. And I was so happy with my first book being softcover and that it just had interest by non-academics, like it's about tattooed women. And so actual like tattooed women were buying that book too, which is such an
Mhm.
honor, like for an academic book, because these are not bestsellers, we don't
Mhm.
sell a lot of, books and stuff like that.
Biggest thing with regards to kind of like surprising findings that I got to was that when you finish writing the book and you click send, you're not done writing. So
Mm,
I thought like, oh, we write the book and I'm done writing. Then it's like, no, now you're gonna have to write blurbs for social media. So for example, the publishers all have social media now. And so often in the post-production, they'll ask like, please send us a couple of blurbs, about your book, because then when things come up, they will then tweet those out or they'll post those on Instagram or kind of wherever. So you're writing those, and then of course there's the writing of if you're going to nominate your book for any disciplinary awards, or if you would like to do an op-ed that is
mm.
kind of tied into your book. Some publishers, like Polity Press, have their own blog, and they invite the authors to write a blog post after their book is published with them, and then they host it on their webpage. And then there's again more marketing, but to get the word out about the books. Of course, the publishers have catalogs and they'll do direct emails to their lists, but it has really increasingly, and one of my editors told me this, it has increasingly become incumbent upon the authors to do a good bit of the marketing. So that is sending out emails to colleagues. I posted in a Facebook group that was for sociology teachers, because the post-production document said, professors that may want to adopt this book as a course text. And I'm like, okay, where of course I know like maybe a couple of my colleagues, but I don't know a lot of folks personally and how they teach. So I posted in this group for sociology professors, here's a summary of my books. That was another thing. I had to kind of write a short social media summary of it. Would anyone be interested in this? And of course, people were like, oh, yes, of course. And like, they sent me their email addresses and I was able to turn that over to the publisher. But these additional writings after the book is finished, for my first book, there wasn't as much of that because it was published with a literary press versus a social science or an academic press. It was more kind of literary. And so
Mm.
the publisher himself did a lot of that on the front end with libraries and bookstores and kind of because it was just general public. So that publisher did more of that writing. But then when I published my second one with an academic press, and then most recently these next two with academic presses, I've noticed, okay, there's more of this writing kind of on the back end that I need to do, because it could be adopted as a text for a class, or because you're going to nominate it for awards. My first book was edited volume, and often those are not eligible for awards, so there was no additional writing of nomination letters or anything like
Mm.
that for that one. But then for my next ones, I was like, oh wait, okay, there's more writing to be done. And so once you finish writing the book, obviously click send, celebrate, do all of that, but there's going to be more writing down the road as well.
Yeah, the marketing writing, and also you might have to do interviews, and
Mhm.
maybe folks are, pretty shy about being on the radio or being, on the maybe even the local news or something talking about your local book. But
Mhm.
that's a lot of marketing and a lot of sales time that they probably don't prepare you for.
Yeah.
And so what other lessons do you learn or advise your clients with?
So I advise them to, I mean, it's sort of psychological, but like take a deep breath and hit send, because there's no deadline for a book proposal, right? With your dissertation, you need to get it to your committee
Mm.
this day because your defense is, scheduled. With a journal, they give you, okay, you're doing an R&R, it needs to be back by this particular day. But unless you're in one of the few, departments that say, give us a university press book and that is tenure. Don't give it to us and you get no tenure.
Mm.
Unless you're in that clear and hard line of a department, doing a book doesn't have a definitive timeline. And so people can spend too much time like, okay, it's done. I'm workshopping it. No, I want to change this. Ooh, I want to update that. At some point, you just have to take a deep breath and hit that send button. But of course, we as academics often, feel so nervous about getting our ideas out there and having other people, look at them or judge them. And, like I said, with the book proposal, I had a client and they have written enough articles. They're going up for tenure. Their case looks like it's going to be a slam dunk. So they don't need the book. And so therefore, what is kind of going to push them to be like, it's good enough. Let me go on and hit send. And so we talk about that when we have our Zoom meeting, what will feel like you're ready to send this out, to go on and get that sent out.
Is it very separate, the desire to publish versus just that career pressure of like, I'm going up for tenure, I have to do this. And so that would add so much stress and anxiety and not a joyful process if like,
Right.
well, you just need to get this publication. Is that where folks are coming from?
So everyone that I've worked with regards to their tenure cases have been built based on articles. And so they did
Okay.
not need the book for tenure. They obviously wanted it for various purposes. Their research they want to get out to the public, or it's a goal to have written a book, or they wanted to turn their dissertation into a book. They've always thought
Mm.
about that. So I haven't worked with anyone, say, in an English department that really needs that book
Okay.
for tenure. But some of my clients have, we've talked through what type of presses they would want, because even if they don't need it, they still want it to count, say when they go up for tenure, or they want it to count for going up for full. And so some universities, particularly larger R1s and ranked departments, they will only really count a university press book. And
Mm.
so I really like Polity Press. I think that's, they're really great. They've been awesome post-production with regards to, helping get ideas, get the book out there to the public facing. I think Polity is great for that. But there are some departments, that are like, nope, a university press book is what you need in this department. And so I've had conversations with authors about that. Like, okay, well, you want it to be public facing, but your university is saying it has to be a university press. Now let's kind of think about which university presses seem to be the best at public kind of facing kind of work. Or
Mm.
then there have been others who have said, I had one client who was actually not tenure, non-tenure track. And they were like, it doesn't matter. This isn't for tenure. This is for me. I'm just going to find the best press. And, rank doesn't matter. If it's prestigious, doesn't matter, because they said, I'm writing this for me. I'm writing this for the population that the book is on, that I want to get this information out. Like you were saying, tattooed women were actually, buying your book and we're excited about it. That's the way this other client was with her topic. And so the reputation of the press didn't matter to her, but then for other folks, it does. And so we have those conversations kind of at the end of going over the proposal, when we're thinking about, okay, you've got your one target press, but just in case this one says no, we need to think of some additional ones. Where else would you like to send it?
So you have a ranked list then of like send it out first to your first choice publisher and then on down the list.
So that was another mistake that I made for my first book, was I did it very sequentially. I sent it to my first choice, then my second choice, then my third choice. And then because I was thinking in that article mindset that we are,
Right.
trained in as academics, where that's what you do with articles. You go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it wasn't until my second book when I was doing their proposal, and it was for a series. And so because that one was for a series, the proposal guidelines were much more, not rigid, but formulaic for how they wanted the proposals done. And so one of the questions on that one was, what other presses are you sending this to? And I said, oh, that was an interesting phrasing. Not are you, but tell us the other ones you are sending it to. So then I talked with that series editor, like, hey, is that even allowed? Because for articles, it's not. And she's like, no, it's like totally allowed. And so I was like, oh, that is interesting. And so when I talk to authors, when they're sending me a draft, it obviously has to be formulated for a particular press because, like I said, they can all be a little tiny bit different there. But then we talk at the end, okay, well, if you're going to, this is your top choice. Now you're going to modify this one for also your second choice and your third choice, and maybe send out all three at the same time. Though you then, in your email to your editor, need to be very clear that that's what you were doing so that they understand that.
And how important is prestige then?
Of the press, and it
Yeah.
depends. It depends on your job. It depends on what you're writing the
I
book
guess
for.
it depends on our our
Yeah,
level of our
yeah.
schooling
If
and what the
you're at an Ivy
expectation
League,
is.
then they're probably going to want a more prestigious press than if you are at a a regional public school like here. We don't have a graduate program. Tenure is not based purely on if you have a Cambridge University Press or Oxford University Press book. So, there's a bit more leeway, I feel, for folks not at the elite institutions to publish, to pick a publisher based on their desires, their needs, what they want for their book versus these external pressures of, my department will only take a top three publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are sociologists pretty mixed? I mean, maybe we don't require books. We publish a lot of chapters and articles as well. Like, what's your sense of, do sociologists focus on books? Because I guess like my colleagues in my department seem to have more articles.
Mm-hmm. Based on my experience working with authors, it seems to be a mixed bag. Kind of folks who did qualitative dissertations maybe want to turn their dissertation into a book, but it seems kind of, after a couple of articles, maybe. Folks who were quantitative, I haven't worked with anyone doing quantitative work for a book. I've read a political science book based on quantitative work. And of course, there's some other books out there, of course, based on quantitative work, but I've worked mainly with qualitative writers. Maybe that's because my research has been qualitative and they've been the ones comfortable to reach out to me. But my sense is that it really does depend on what the person needs or wants the book for. So like I said, the client who would like a public facing book, but her university is like, you need a university press, a higher ranked
Mm.
publisher versus the client who's like, I'm writing this for me. I'm not in academia anymore, but I've done this research. I want it published as a book. So then she's got kind of more leeway in picking a press based on her own desires and her own wants versus what the people voting on her tenure case are going to say.
Advice for people out there, or even just trying to find your kind of folks of who should reach out to you?
Starting with last kind of bits of advice or additional advice. One thing is that for a book proposal, it is really big to not take too long to build it up, right? Get to the point very, very early. Do that because the kind of the first section most publishers are going to say is a brief summary of the book. They literally mean like one page, like brief kind of summary of the book. But then the next section for most proposals is going to be a detailed chapter outline. And so that's going to be a really important place to kind of focus on and be really clear about what is the topic of each chapter and how does that tie in to the kind of overall summary that you gave on that first page. And so making sure that those kind of first few pages really make sense, like here's the overall summary, and then you break it down into each of the chapters. That's going to make your proposal look like a person that has a proposal for a book. Because, we can kind of take the old joke, everyone's working on a book, everyone's writing a book, right? And that's true. Everyone can have like these wonderful ideas of things that would be good as a book. But in writing the proposal, you need to be able to show the editor that you don't just have this great idea that could be a book. You have an outline of a book in your head, like chapter 1 will be this, chapter 2 will be that, chapter 3 will be this. And then the last thing that I do remind clients, particularly those that are kind of nervous to go on and send the proposal out there, is that book writing is much more iterative and feedback oriented than journal article writing. So when you send your editor the book proposal, they're going to read it and then send you back some comments to help strengthen it because they work at their press. They already know, so and so who sits at the end of that roundtable is going to ask this question about it,
Yeah.
or so and so always has to bring up this with regards to this methodology. So the editor will be able to send you back kind of ways to clarify it before they take your proposal to the board or to whomever they take it to get approval to offer you that contract. And so there's this working with process. And as you're working on the book, your editor may ask to see a chapter or may ask to see a couple of chapters, may ask to see the whole manuscript and then give you feedback on it before it goes out. And these are just the regular editors. Like this is not even talking about getting a developmental editor, just like the editors at the presses are actually working with you. Then after that, it's going to go out for review. They're going to get some folks to review your proposal, and then they send back feedback. And we as academics, I feel, are just so used to reviewer two for journals. And maybe I'm just lucky, but I've never had reviewer two for a book proposal. And it might be because book proposal reviewers are paid. And so maybe that's the difference, but they are just so much more invested and give great feedback and really are kind of helping make the book better, which is just such a different experience than going through articles where it can often be you didn't cite so and so, or I don't like this methodology. It shouldn't be so hard with articles. But with books, again, maybe I've just had great experiences, but my clients have had the same experience when they've told me, the feedback that they've gotten on their proposals. It's just so much more helpful. And so kind of getting over that fear, putting your work out there and going on and sending it off, but then also realizing writing a book isn't, I sit down, I write the entire thing, I send it to my editor, they check it, and then they print it exactly as is. It's a much more iterative process and a productive iterative process, unlike the, reviewer twos that we often get with articles.
Yeah, and you're saying that this is a feedback process from the very beginning, from
Yes.
when you submit that original kind of idea, and they could say, well, you need to answer this and this question. And so I guess
Mm-hmm.
that would be, that was a question I was thinking about, is just how much feedback they might give you as far as shifting or changing your idea. Like they do give you some guidance then about like, perhaps not this direction, but bringing it over here a bit. Like how much of that do they
Mm-hmm.
do as far as guiding you off your original idea?
Yeah, so for my books and then for the clients that have shared their feedback from their reviews, they haven't ever guided us off of the topic or completely in different ways. It's always just been helping to improve the idea that you have, helping to make
Mm.
it either more marketable or more understandable to a broader audience. Expanding it, saying, "Oh, you mentioned this. Could you actually expand upon that and talk more about that? That was really interesting." And so it hasn't so much been a changing of the original idea, but just really helping to improve it and make it be the best that it can be.
I'm sure you can relate. Like I study a lot of marginalized communities and very kind of niche topics. And even, my master's thesis is on women who are bisexual and biracial. And
Mhm.
I tried to submit that out, so much as a book proposal, as chapters. And maybe it's too niche. And one of my more recent proposals was about tattooed professors, and I sent it to Johns Hopkins University, their critical university press. And so
Mhm.
they have really great books about critiquing the universities as an institution. And I was thinking that this could be part of that critique of just the new face of professors. And also my interviewees were very diverse, so they were talking about a lot of different kinds of embodiments of professors. But ultimately, in that book proposal did get to the board, and the editor was enthusiastic about it, but the board, said no. And so I
Mhm.
was thinking maybe that was too niche. Maybe I could have a chapter on tattoos, but I could also focus on other kinds of identity demographics or embodiment in the classroom. And I've been thinking about that because I still want to work with that product. And so I was thinking perhaps I could even shift from even, we have a lot of books that have like chapters based on particular identities like race and gender. And as sociologists, of course, we're intersectional and we don't want to separate, identities like that too, because obviously people fit into all the chapters then. You have a race, you have a gender. And so I was thinking maybe I could conceptualize it differently about ideas of like the body in the classroom in different ways. But what do you think about just that kind of being too niche? Should we kind of broaden our topics? How do we maybe we're working with a particular community, but we should be thinking about the sales part of the book and that it needs to sell to a lot of people and not just, mixed race people or whatever kind of you could see that those numbers are very small. And so I'm imagining a publisher wants the book to appeal to more people.
So with your case in particular, I personally do not like having to change the topic to fit into a particular publisher. I had the first paper off of my dissertation was accepted to a journal article, and they said, okay, but the R&R was, we want you to stop focusing on mixed race so much in the paper and centering that, and instead center the social psychological concepts that you're talking about, and then just have mixed race be your example. And
Um,
I did not want to do that because I
hmm.
felt like that work was fundamentally about mixed race people, and mixed race needed to be centered. So I pulled it from that, thank you for the R&R, but I pulled it from there and sent it to a race journal that was perfectly happy for me to
Uh-huh.
center the race element of it. And so thinking about your book proposal, if you were a client, I would tell you, depending on what you need for tenure, but if you didn't need that particular level of press for tenure, then if you were my client, I would advise you to find a publisher that wants your book as it is, because that is an excellent topic. So the first one you mentioned, the first topic about mixed race, biracial, bisexual. I mean, there's a critical mixed race studies series at Emerald University Press. That's what
Mm.
my dissertation book was in. And so a series like that would be absolutely happy to have a book on such a quote unquote niche topic, because that's what the series is. And so if the general publishing kind of just sending it to the publisher, isn't, if it feels too niche, or if they're like, no, this isn't, what we're looking for, then look for series, because there's lots of series out there. And I feel like people become series editors the same reason they become, special issue of journal editors, because so often these topics, we call them niche, but really they are on marginalized communities, often critical perspectives on marginalized communities that maybe, mainstream dominant hegemonic institutions don't want to publish. And so finding a special editor, finding a series that is for your niche, for your topic, if you're my client, that's what I would advise you to do, versus changing your work,
Mm.
changing your wonderful work to try to fit into the institution. I would say find an institution that wants your work. But again, we do have to bracket that with, are you a tenure track professor that has to have a university press for tenure? Then our hands are a bit more tied. But if you
Mhm.
are not, then you can kind of stick to your guns a little bit more with less career implications, particularly because I think this will be like your third and your fourth book. So
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
good point. And I guess I was so excited to get that far with such a great press that I lost my enthusiasm, and I haven't really sent that out. So thank you. I'll keep sending that out. But that brings up another issue, and of course, I'm sure lots of academics can relate to this, is that our data is aging rapidly. And so, I don't want to put the date that I did these interviews. And so I'm trying to think about ways in which I can freshen my data. And actually, you do that because you kind of re-up on your interviewees. And so I was thinking too, maybe I should continue to interview folks in those areas so that I can say that I did this over time. And so
Mhm.
I have more breadth of a perspective. But what about that kind of thing of like our data might be aging, and so how do we kind of keep it current?
Yeah, so one way to do that is, of course, to do a second round of data collection, and then you can show time one, time two, kind of make it almost kind of pseudo longitudinal.
Yeah.
So you could do that. Another way could be to frame it, contextualize it historically. This is what women professors, with tattoos, this is what they were, or
Hmm.
all professors with tattoos were experiencing in the academy in 2000 to 2010. Like this is what was going on then. And then you can kind of think maybe about a concluding chapter saying, since that time, these laws have been passed. I don't know how much the Crown Act, that's with regards to hair, but
Mhm.
let's say someone was doing hair styles versus, tattoos, then they had their older data. They could talk
Yeah.
about that. It'd be very historically situated. Then kind of the next bits, the conclusion or the afterward could say, okay, well, since this data was collected, the Crown Act has been passed. This has happened, X, Y, and Z has happened. And we can kind of think forward to what's going to happen in the future, what's been happening since your data was collected. So unless you're talking about you collected data in the early 80s, I think you'd be fine.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially if you can point to something like a legislation or some time period that you can mark before and after that. So what about just any kind of concluding like ideas or comments that you would give folks? I mean, I think it's a lot of probably cheerleading and keeping people's spirits up too, because it's really disheartening. I mean, yeah, we've all been critiqued so heavily by that mean reviewer too. And so we're scared to send it out. We've gotten really mean reviews back. I used to collect all my rejection letters, have a binder back in the days of paper and say, oh, good, another rejection letter for my collection, because you just got to kind of psych yourself up somehow. So what do you tell folks about just keeping on with the pressure of trying to find a publisher?
Yeah, I tell folks if you finished a dissertation, you can finish a book. Like the dissertation, honestly, will and sometimes ends up being longer than the book because the dissertation has no limit. And I had a colleague, their dissertation was 500 pages. You're not going to do a whole 500-page book, right?
Mhm.
But if you can finish that dissertation, then you can finish this book. I've had clients that think like, I never thought I'd be the type of person that, could write a book. And it's like, nope, you are. You finish that dissertation, you can write a book. Like you can do it. It just it's hard in the sense that it takes a lot of time. It
Yeah,
takes a lot of organized time because again, absent the people who are in those few departments that tell
yeah.
them you need this book for XYZ by this date, absent those folks, the rest of us need to make our own timeline. And it's really harder to stick to your own timeline than an externally imposed timeline. And so long as one is organized, loves the topic that they're writing on, we can actually, get it done.
Yeah, because a lot of people are transitioning from this graduate school time period when they just had all the time in the world, and now they're
Mm-hmm.
working, they're adjuncting, they're a tenure track. You got very
Mm-hmm.
limited time. And so it's just, I've seen so many people, they're like, I have to have days and unending days to write and write. It's like, no, you got to learn how to write in small amounts of time. And so just that
Yes.
mental shift of just how to be disciplined and very
Yeah.
organized with your writing time.
Oh yeah. When my second book came out, I posted about it on social media, and one of my daughter's dance friends' moms uh commented under that, oh, I'm so excited. I remember when you were working on it. Like I was there when you were writing it. And she was because dance practice always runs late.
Oh,
And
uh-huh.
so I would be sitting in the lobby and, I've
With
got
the
my book out,
laptop.
like highlighting, doing literature review, or I'd have, my computer and I'm typing, oh, what are you typing? I'm working on my book. I'm working on this chapter. So like she was there when I was working on it because like, dance practice runs 30 minutes late. Well, that's 30 minutes I could be reviewing reading something for the literature or touching up a section or formatting, the references, or spell checking or like kind of, doing whatever. And so like those little 30-minute bits kind of add up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I can see, talking to you is very helpful. And I wonder who your ideal clients are because this is definitely a service that would be so helpful in your ability to read a particular proposal and give that the really individualized feedback then to the particular person to understand how they operate and to see their book proposal. So who are the folks that you're
Mhm.
seeking out for this?
Yeah, so mainly it's sociologists because that is
Okay.
my discipline, of course. But anyone kind of tangentially related to sociology, poli sci, African American studies, women and gender studies, just kind of anything related to social sciences, I would definitely be able to help. I do not have any experience with, those big like commercial presses like Penguin and like those sorts
Mhm.
of books. I don't have any experience with that. So my clients are all academics, with the exception of one. We're tenure track or tenured academics. And so yeah, that's kind of the group that I would, love to help. And just anyone who really wants to get their book out there and like wants to do the book, but needs, a little bit of help, needs a cheerleader, needs somebody who's been there, who can, read over it and, give you that feedback. Because see, when we're writing articles, even when we're writing our dissertation, all other academics have written articles and all other academics have written their dissertations or our master's thesis. So that's a genre of writing that if you want a friend to read over it before you submit it, then you can literally ask any of your friends. But with book proposals, fewer academics have written successful book proposals. And so that's a kind of smaller group of people to have the experience to look over yours and give you that feedback from someone who's been there. And so after, it was my friend's idea for me to start doing this because I helped them, because I was the one that had time and had done the books first. And so then they were like, this was great. You should offer it to more people. And so I was like, okay, sure. It's fun. And I'm just a book nerd. I love books. And so anyone who's excited about their book, but, just needs, someone to read over that proposal and help make sure they're on the right track, then I'm your gal.
That's awesome. So where can folks find you then?
Instagram is mainly where I am because now I'm a dance mom and dance is more Instagram than Twitter. So mainly over on Instagram, at Jenny _PhD. But also you can just email me, Jennifer P. Sims, all one word, no caps or dots or underscores at gmail.com. And then I've got a webpage, which is just tiny URL/Jen Sims. And then that takes you straight to my webpage. And it talks about book proposals on there too.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's
Thanks,
been a
Beverly.
pleasure.
Yeah, this is fun. And I look forward to your two books. They both sound
Yes.
super exciting. As someone who
Now,
studied,
now I'm psyched up. So thank you for the
yeah,
pep talk.
yes, excited. And I've got tattoos myself, so I'm really interested in reading about that.
Excellent. All right. Thank you.